Oh, right. Yeah. Now, when I was researching gaining traction, the first literary reference I could find anywhere was in 1605. And this all goes back to mechanical engineering and physics. And here's something that I find really quite fascinating, because in a way, this phrase I think now means the opposite of what it originally meant, which I'll try to explain, but let's see what you think. So when it comes to physics, if you drop a wheel onto a surface, it's got to have some kind of grip. And that is, broadly speaking, called traction, but it's linked to the amount of force and power that any kind of team, or indeed an engine, would require in order to drag that object along a surface. So I'm not much of a scientist, but it's essentially an interplay between power to move an object along a surface, usually with wheels, versus the resistance that it has. And clearly, if that's all covered in water and there's no motion and so on, it's all going to fall away or nothing's going to happen at all. So the original idea of gain traction is this thing grips to this surface. Brackets to the layperson, that means you're going to slow it down. Because it's got grip, which is regarded as an initial advantage because it's not falling off anywhere, then that's okay. But I think what happens now in modern business, and I'd be fascinated with your view, is that people think that traction really is a euphemism for momentum and forward motion, because it seems to be interchangeable to say, hey guys, let's make sure we gain traction with this product. So, well, that's interesting. What, you want it to grip firmly to this surface, but strangely not move anywhere? Or would you like it to move rapidly from A to B with nearly no grip at all? What do you reckon? Any ideas?
I think oftentimes of the set of words, potential bullshit words, I think this, at least in the US, I think is the least to maybe moderately harmful, but perhaps the most ambiguous. So on one hand, it can represent sort of a hunch or of a solution to a problem, making like little or uncertain progress sound more significant or impressive than it really is. So it could be, sometimes it's referred to as like, climbing the ladder. It could be the very first rung on the ladder, or it could be somewhere in the middle or somewhere towards the top. It really depends on what the situation is, what the context is, what the history of the movement has been. If there's been a decade where there's no movement, a single rung on the ladder of progress could be referred to as we're gaining some traction. We have some progress. And then on the other hand, gaining traction can really undercut the actual progress that's actually been made. So people usually use gaining traction in a way similar, I believe, to always in beta, to suggest sort of anything from a little to a lot of progress toward completion of a project or some solution to a problem. So it's extremely ambiguous, and it's sort of it depends on what the history is, what the context is with regard to either the software that's being launched or the procedure or the policy that's being launched. Is there some evidence that there's been some progress in the desired direction? But again, that could be just a little bit, or it could be a lot, sort of depending on the trajectory of the situation. That's how it's usually used. Yeah. And people want to see progress. Progress and prosperity is paramount. So that's right in line with the mentality of the desire. It's not about, we don't want to just maintain. Most brands, companies, they do not want to just maintain their upper hand or their position. They want to continue reaching towards the top.
Yes, and it never stops, does it? And that's why we always joke, is that every financial year, when you've achieved a certain target, your chief exec or someone at head office says, thank you for doing that. Can you now do that plus 10% next year? And as we used to say, is that as soon as somebody achieves the impossible for their boss, they simply add it to their regular list of duties. It becomes the new norm.
Yes.
Level. Yeah. So this is really interesting. It's also, of course, linked to one of my all-time worst pieces of bullshit, which is going forward. Because no one ever says, well, we'd really like to make some progress on this going backwards. Or staying
it's a throwaway. It's almost a throwaway for. But you also reminded me, Kevin, of how sometimes people will refer to movement or progress, and then they find that they're really not going anywhere, and they'll use words like a hamster in a hamster wheel. So the hamster's got lots of traction on that wheel, but they're really not going anywhere. And I think it does fit with the trajectory of or the illusion of movement. But again, I think it's the most ambiguous of terms.
And I think, thank you. Yeah, and another one I thought of just there, of course, was zero growth, which is an absolutely fantastic piece of obfuscation to suggest that growth is even being discussed, where in fact the amount of it is naught. And that's a classic way of making the whole thing a smokescreen. But what fascinates me about this one, in conclusion, I think, is I love your idea about ambiguity. Essentially, here is a phrase that is regularly used in business, and it's so ambiguous that in the broadest sense, nobody actually knows what it means, because it could mean any of a whole range of things, some of them totally contradictory, depending on the context, which to me is the essence of bullshit, because as Harry Frankfurt, our revealed master on the topic, says, the bullshitter is neither on the side of lies nor truth. And for the ordinary person like you or me, it completely confuses us, because normally we can tell whether someone's lying because it's kind of obvious. But also we naturally default to assuming that people are telling the truth until proven otherwise. Bullshitter doesn't have any of those constraints.
Absolutely.
They can just grab anything from anywhere, and as long as it provides a soundbite in the moment, that's okay. And then half the time, nobody says, hang on, the king's got no clothes on here. What does that mean? Or does it mean the opposite of what I think it means? Can we clarify? And no one does, and we just roll on to the next meeting.
Yeah, I think you're right too, Kevin, in terms of the suggestion that it can provide this illusion that data are actively being collected, and we're keeping a close watch on whether or not we're making progress. And people in corporate America use this term sometimes, this idea that the world is data driven, or they say that the data driven world. And I thought, if the world were actually data driven, I wouldn't have written my book. Because that's an argument I've tried to make, is that we should be data driven. We should know whether or not we're actually gaining traction, we're actually making progress from Monday to Friday. But oftentimes it's just a best guess, or what my father would usually say as a manager in a department store. You just take a WAG at it, which stood for a wild ass guess.
I love that. That one, I'm writing that one down with your permission.
Oh, sure.
A wild ass guess. Lovely.